You don't mess with a man's ranch and expect him to sit quietly, especially not mine. My name's Cole Harper, and I own a decent spread of land out in Drywood, Texas. Family owned since 1937. My granddad ran cattle here, my dad ran crops, and me, I've been fighting off drought, dust storms, and bureaucratic nonsense for the last 12 years. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for the storm that came wearing khaki shorts and a smug little HOA badge. See, the Homeowners Association for the new development next to my land decided my ranch didn't fit the community aesthetic. That's right. Apparently, my barns, tractors, and God forbid chickens didn't match their gated glass box fantasy. At first, I ignored them. I figured city folks would get tired of pretending to be country real quick. But then the letters started. Fines for unsightly fencing. Warnings about odor complaints. I laughed them off. But then came the drought, 3 months of baking heat, no rain, and my water line working overtime to keep the crops alive. That's when the HOA did something so stupid, so cruel, it stopped being funny. One morning, I woke up to find my water line bone dry. The well hadn't run out. No pipe burst. Someone had cut the supply. Deliberately. At first, I thought it was just a break. I grabbed my tools, trudged out to the main line, and started digging. That's when I found ITME PVC water pipe cleanly sliced, not eroded, not crack cut, and sealed off with a brand new metal cap. Like someone didn't just want to stop the flow, they wanted to make damn sure I couldn't turn it back on. My stomach dropped, I knew who did it, and I had proof. My ranch butts up against HOA land at the south edge. There's a camera mounted on a utility pole nearby mine. Night vision, motion sensor, and cloud storage. I pulled up the footage on my phone, and sure enough, there he was. Richard Brenner, president of the HOA. Real estate agent, drives a Mercedes like he's allergic to dirt, wearing gloves, kneeling by my line, and capping it like he was building a damn Lego set. I stared at the video, my blood boiling. They wanted to starve my ranch. Let my crops die. Maybe force me to sell so they could bulldoze and build more overpriced boxes with quartz countertops, but they made one mistake. They thought I'd play by their rules. They didn't know who they were dealing with. See, I know this land better than anyone, better than Google Earth, better than county records, and I knew something they didn't. About half a mile upstream, there's a natural creek that runs parallel to the property line. It's seasonal, barely a trickle most years. But thanks to the snowmelt and some clever trenching my granddad did in the 70s, it was still flowing. Not much, but enough. Enough to save my crops, and enough to screw theirs. The HOA gets its lawn water from a shared irrigation system owned that feeds directly off the same creek, piped through a simple intake valve. And that intake, it was about 30 feet upstream from my border. All I had to do was move the creek, divert the flow, just a bit. Make their intake suck air while mine gulped life. I spent 2 days trenching like a madman. I didn't sleep, barely ate, just dug, lined the path with rocks, and guided the water where I wanted it. When I finished, the creek curved right through my eastern field and bypassed the HOA's valve like it never existed. It wasn't vandalism. It was gravity, nature. I just helped it along. And by the time the HOA noticed, my crops were green again. Theirs, brown, dead, parched into submission. I waited for the storm to come. I thought maybe Brenner would show up, yelling, threatening, maybe try to call the cops. But what I got instead was even sweeter. A letter. Not a warning, no. That would have made sense. What I got was a request. A polite, desperate little note from the HOA asking if I'd consider restoring the previous flow of water to support community landscape preservation. Landscape preservation. These jerks tried to kill my ranch, and now they wanted me to save their petunias. I didn't respond. I just framed the letter and hung it in my barn. A week later, they sent a lawyer. Said I was interfering with community resources. I sent him packing with a jug of dust and a USB stick containing the footage of Brenner slicing my line. Haven't heard from them since. The best part? Every morning, I sip my coffee on the porch and watch their sprinklers struggle to spit out more than a wheeze. My land's alive. Theirs is dying. They messed with the wrong rancher and now they're learning what happens when you try to bury a man whose roots run deeper than your water line. I thought the sight of their brown lawns and withering hedges would be enough. I thought watching Richard Brenner, that smug HOA president, lose his composure over dying rose bushes would be the cherry on top. But I underestimated just how petty some people can get when their turf turns to sand. A week after I rerouted the creek, things started to get weird. My mailbox was smashed twice. My fence post got sawed off in the middle of the night. And someone, probably Richard's lackey in that ridiculous golf cart, left a dead possum on my porch like it was a message. That's when I realized they weren't just mad. They were scared. See? Those manicured lawns were more than landscaping. They were a symbol, a control mechanism. HOA people love control. They can't stand wild grass or rusty gates because it reminds them the world isn't actually neat and predictable. My ranch, with its mud and tractors and roaming hens, was everything they feared, independent. And now that I'd shown I could outmaneuver them without lifting a single lawsuit, they were unraveling. And scared people do stupid things, dangerous things. But if they wanted a war, I wasn't about to play defense. I started laying traps. Nothing illegal, just smart. I set up floodlights, trail cams, and motion sensors along the fence line. I even mounted an old hunting camera in the tree overlooking the creek bed. Every time a raccoon sneezed, I knew about it. And within 3 days, my suspicions were confirmed. Around 3:00 a.m., my phone pinged. I pulled up the camera feed and there he was, Brenner himself, creeping through the brush like some kind of half-drunk spy. He was holding a toolbox, shining a flashlight at my trench, probably trying to figure out how I rerouted the creek and whether he could undo it. I watched him trip over his own feet and curse like a toddler denied candy. The next morning, I printed the footage and mailed it to every member of the HOA board anonymous, of course. Let them know their fearless leader liked sneaking onto private property in the dark. I also stapled a blown-up still of him mid-fall to a telephone pole on the edge of my field. Captioned it, "O in action." Petty? Sure, but effective. The man didn't show his face for 3 days. When he finally did, it looked like he'd aged 10 years. But their little sabotage efforts weren't over. One afternoon, while I was checking my irrigation lines, I found 3 of my crop rows trampled, flattened, like a stampede had run through them. Except there were no hoof prints, just boot marks, fresh ones. I took a soil sample, bagged it, and did something I hadn't done yet. I called the sheriff. Now, Sheriff Doolin and I go way back. Played football in the same high school, used to fish together before the world got busy. I hadn't brought him into this mess because, well, I figured he had bigger fish to fry. But now, I needed backup. He came out to the ranch that evening, scratched his beard, and listened as I laid out the whole Saga Water line, creek reroute, sabotage, and all. When I showed him the trampled crops, he whistled low and said, "You know this is going to get uglier before it gets better, right?" I nodded. "Good," he said. "Then let's make sure they know we're watching." By morning, I had an official "Trespassers will be prosecuted" sign posted right next to a freshly installed game camera, this one streaming straight to the sheriff's office. That message was for everyone. Now, you'd think that'd be the end of it, that maybe, just maybe, these HOA folks would back off. But no, what they did next crossed a line so hard it left skid marks. I came back from town one evening just picking up some feed and found my barn door wide open. My tools scattered, a sack of seed slashed open, and on the wall, painted in red, "This land doesn't belong to you." At first, I just stood there, breathing, trying to keep from exploding. Then I took out my phone and snapped photos of everything. This wasn't just pettiness anymore. This was criminal. I sent the pics to Doolin, and within the hour, he was there with 2 deputies, combing through the scene. No fingerprints, no footprints, just malice. But that message, "This land doesn't belong to you," that was the tell. That wasn't just vandalism. That was someone who truly believed I didn't belong here. That my Ranch Me legacy was just a placeholder for something shinier, richer, more profitable. That's when it clicked. They weren't just trying to bully me, They were trying to erase me, wipe the ranch off the map and turn it into phase 2 of their little suburban dream. Too bad for them, I'm not a man you erase. After the barn incident, it stopped being personal. It became war. You can forgive sabotage. You can even swallow a few threats. But trying to erase a man from his own soil? That's a declaration of annihilation. The red paint on my barn wall didn't wash off easily, and that was fine. I didn't want it to. I wanted the stain to stay, a reminder of what they thought they could do, of what they thought I'd tolerate. I spent that entire night sitting on my porch, rifle across my lap, eyes on the road that led in from the development. I didn't sleep. I didn't blink. And when the sun came up, I had a new plan. They wanted to drive me out and bury me in paperwork? Fine. But I drowned them in the one thing they loved the least: mess. And lucky for me, the creek I'd rerouted was just the beginning. Because just downstream from the HOA's prized greenbelt, right beneath their pristine rows of fake turf and walking trails, ran a storm drain that emptied straight into their clubhouse foundation. And after years of disuse, all it needed was a nudge, a little pressure, a little water. I was about to turn community space into swampland. I spent the next 2 days rigging a system that would have made my granddad proud. Using irrigation piping, a battery pump, and some well-placed sandbags, I built a temporary holding pool on my side of the property. During peak heat, when no one was paying attention, I started redirecting extra creek water into that pool slowly, carefully. Then, once night fell, I opened the valves and let gravity do its thing. The runoff flowed under the property line, slipped through an old stone culvert, and right into the long abandoned drain. It didn't take long. The ground on their side was already brittle and cracking from the drought. But add water, it turned to slush. Within 24 hours, HOA board members were stomping around their community trail in 300 sneakers, trying to figure out why their turf was bubbling like a bad souffle. I heard one of them actually yelled, "It's like the land's rebelling." Damn right it was. And I didn't even need to set foot on their property to make it happen. That's the beauty of revenge done right. You let the earth do the work. You just steer the flow. I stayed out of sight, watched the chaos unfold, and waited for the backlash I knew was coming. Sure enough, 2 days later, a county inspector showed up. Clipboard in hand, sunglasses on, looking like he hated his life. "Got a complaint," he said, not even looking me in the eye. "Possible unauthorized water redirection." I led him to the fence line, smiled, real polite, and pointed at the creek. "Water's just doing what water does," I said. "If gravity pulls it my way, well, I reckon that's not a crime." He poked around a bit, took a few photos, and left without another word. Later, I found out the inspector's brother was one of my cattle feed suppliers. Small town, word gets around. Brenner must have pulled every string he had to try to stop me. But when your ranch has been here for generations and their neighborhood's still under warranty, you win that tug-of-war every time. Still, I didn't relax. I knew this wasn't over. HOA people don't give up. They regroup, retaliate. They meet in back rooms and sip sparkling water while drafting emergency resolutions. So I waited, and I watched. And when their retaliation came, it didn't come in the form of fines or threats. It came wrapped in lies neatly typed and filed with the county clerk's office. I found out from my lawyer's small town guy named Marlin, wears bolo ties and drinks more coffee than a preacher at sunrise. He called me up and said, "Cole, you better sit down. HOA's filed a claim of adverse possession." At first, I laughed. Thought he was joking, but he wasn't. Adverse possession is a legal loophole, basically. If someone uses your land for long enough without protest, they can try to claim it. The HOA was arguing that part of their walking trail crossed onto my property and that because I hadn't stopped them, it meant I had forfeited that strip of land. That wasn't just ballsy, it was insane. But here's where it got interesting. That old culvert I'd used to flood them, it passed under that disputed strip. If they wanted to claim it, they'd have to prove it didn't belong to me, which meant opening an investigation into its history, which meant digging into land records. And guess who those records favored? My family's name was all over them, dating back to 1000, 937. Not only did they have no legal claim to the land, they had unknowingly admitted, in writing, that their precious trail system had been built on my soil. They handed me the rope, and I was more than ready to hang them with it. By the time the paperwork hit my desk, I already knew what my response would be. I called up Marlemy lawyer, steady as bedrock, and told him 2 words: counterclaim everything. See, they done me a favor, filing that adverse possession claim. It gave us legal access to drag every inch of that trail through the system, survey maps, drainage permits, environmental impact reports, and buried in that mountain of red tape was a gold nugget. Their so-called walking trail had been extended without a permit, no environmental clearance, no easement, nothing. Just some HOA goons with a backhoe and delusions of grandeur. Marlon put together a beautiful motion accusing them of encroachment, unlawful development, and violation of a dozen municipal codes. Filed it the next morning. By that afternoon, I had a visit from their HOA attorney, a stiff man in a tighter suit than his blood circulation could handle. He tried to play it cool, opening with, "Mr. Harper, we'd like to resolve this amicably." I smiled, offered him lemonade, and asked if he preferred his crow grilled or deep fried. Because make no mistake, he'd come to beg, and I was just getting started. They wanted a fight. I was about to show them what generational grit looked like. While the legal gears turned, I took the liberty of posting new signs along the disputed trail section. Big, bold ones. Private property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. I even installed a speaker system that played the sound of rattlesnakes whenever motion was detected. Petty? Absolutely. Effective? You bet. Suddenly, HOA residents were calling emergency meetings because children felt unsafe near the Harper boundary. Yeah, that was the idea. They tried to send me cease and desist letters. I papered my outhouse with them. Meanwhile, their greenbelt transformed into a squishy wasteland. The ground stayed wet for weeks, puddles formed in flower beds, and one particularly juicy morning, a board member named Teresa stepped out of her Audi and sank ankle deep into mud. She slipped, screamed, and twisted her ankle right in front of 3 residents and a Pomeranian named Biscuit. I watched the whole thing from my fence line with a cup of coffee and a smirk. Turns out, HOA meetings get a lot more tense when board members start filing insurance claims against each other. The foundation of their fancy little kingdom was turning to mush literally and politically. And every time they tried to fix it, they only made it worse. Now, this should have been enough to make any sane person surrender, but not Richard Brenner. No, this man doubled down like a drunk at a blackjack table. He started patrolling the property line in his golf cart, taking photos, muttering into a recorder, and trying to bait me into saying something he could use in court. I stayed silent. Let my land speak for me. But the tipping point came when he crossed the lintel literally. I caught him one morning, standing 10 feet past the fence, with the landscaper in tow, pointing at my irrigation ditch like he owned the place. I walked up slow, shotgun slung loose over my shoulder, not loaded, but he didn't know that. "Need directions?" I asked. He turned 3 shades paler and nearly choked on his own spit. Claimed he thought he was on community property. I pointed at the rusted survey marker near his polished loafers. "That line's older than your HOA. Might want to watch your step." He left in a hurry. Later that day, I got a call from the sheriff again. Not Doolin this time, but one of his deputies, new guy. Said he got a complaint about threatening behavior. I invited him over, showed him the footage. He chuckled. "Yeah, this ain't a threat. This is Texas." But I knew the game was shifting. The HOA wasn't winning in court. They weren't winning in the community either. Their residents were starting to grumble. I even overheard 2 of them at the feed store complaining about HOA dues going up just to fund some ranch war. Public opinion was tilting in my favor. All I had to do was keep pushing. So I made one final move. I contacted the local news station, told them I had a story about a homeowners association cutting off a rancher's water supply during a drought. Threw in some footage of the damaged water line, a copy of the vandalism photos, and oh yeah, that wonderful video of Brenner trespassing in the middle of the night. They aired it in a 2-minute segment titled, "When the HOA Goes Too Far." The response? Nuclear. The HOA's phone lines blew up. Their Facebook page turned into a war zone. And Richard Brenner? Well, let's just say, For the first time since this battle began, he went silent. The man who tried to erase me was now hiding from the very community he pretended to lead. The news story didn't just rattle, cages it, tore the whole coop apart. I started getting calls. Folks I hadn't spoken to in years rang me up to say they'd seen my face on the evening news, standing in front of my barn with the caption, "Rancher Fights Back." A few of them even dropped by with pie and congratulations like I just won a rodeo. I played it humble, but I was grinning on the inside. The HOA board, meanwhile, was doing damage control at DEFCON 5. They hosted an emergency town hall in the clubhouse, complete with bottled water, folding chairs, and a fresh coat of paint on the moldy walls. From what I heard, Richard Brenner looked like he'd been dragged through a compost heap, red-faced, stammering, and trying to convince homeowners that Mr. Harper is misrepresenting the facts. But here's the thing about facts. They come with receipts. And I had all of them: surveillance footage, waterline blueprints, old land surveys going back to my great-granddad's day. While they scrambled to fix their image, I kept letting the land speak. And right on cue, it rained. Hard. Just enough to tip the balance. And when it did, oh boy, did the earth respond. That storm turned their precious greenbelt into a swampy nightmare. The redirected creek, now swollen from runoff, overflowed right into the storm drain beneath their clubhouse, the same one they'd forgotten to maintain for 2 decades. The water backed up, overflowed the lawn, and created a glorious brown tide that surged into the lower levels of the HOA office. Computers fried, carpet ruined, records soaked. It was biblical. A homeowner caught it all on camera, an absolute masterpiece of panic and finger pointing. The video went viral locally, even made it to a few national HOA horror story threads online. People called it the mudslide heard around the cul-de-sac. I didn't do a damn thing to cause it. Nature did, but I wasn't about to let that go to waste. I printed screenshots of the video, framed one, and added it to the wall of victories inside my barn right next to their cease and desist letter and Brenner's fall in the creek bed. Word got back to the HOA that I was gloating. Damn right I was. These folks tried to destroy my legacy, and now they couldn't host a potluck without wearing waiters. But the real shift came from inside their own ranks. A group of resident solder folks mostly started asking real questions. Why was HOA money being spent on legal battles instead of repairs? Why hadn't they consulted anyone before picking a fight with a 5th-generation rancher who'd lived here before the zip code was invented? I started getting quiet visits. A retired school teacher brought me sweet tea and asked if she could walk her dog by my fence again like she used to. A teenager from the neighborhood offered to help clear storm debris from my back lot. It wasn't pity, it was respect. They realized I wasn't the enemy. I was just the last man standing between them and the insanity of their own board. Brenner, meanwhile, vanished like smoke. No more patrols, no more legal threats, just silence. Eventually, word spread that he'd been asked to resign for the good of the community. His replacement, a soft-spoken accountant named Jerry, who knocked on my door one morning with a peace offering, a jar of local honey, and a promise that the HOA no longer considers your ranch an eyesore. I thanked him politely and didn't trust him one damn bit. Because here's the truth I've learned. Dealing with HOAs, they don't die. They wait, they regroup, they draft new covenants, put on new faces, and try new tactics. Jerry might have been a nice guy, but I wasn't about to let my guard down. So I kept the cameras up, reinforced the fence, rerouted the runoff so it never hit their drains again, but always stayed on my side. And I kept collecting evidence, just in case, because one day someone else would try again. Someone with a clipboard and a smile who thinks tradition can be paved over and replaced with Wi-Fi enabled sprinklers and patio fountains. But when that day comes, I'll be ready. My roots run deeper than their plumbing. My fences were built before their bylaws. And as long as I'm alive, no one not aboard, not a neighbor, not a man in a golf cart will take this land from me. They tried to bury me under red tape. Instead, I gave them mud. Thick, smelly, undeniable mud. And in that mess, I reclaimed everything they tried to wash away. By midsummer, the drought had turned the entire region into a dust bowl. Grass, cracked underfoot like glass. Trees stood like brittle skeletons in the sun. My fields weren't thriving, but they were alive barely. The creek still trickled through thanks to the old trenches and my rerouted path. But the HOA properties, they looked scorched. You'd think by now they'd give up the fight, but no, this is where greed takes over common sense. See, when Brenner disappeared and the mudslide ruined their clubhouse, the HOA board took a new angle. Conservation. That's right. Suddenly, they were environmentalists. They drafted up a proposal to the county demanding all water redirection from private properties be evaluated for fairness and ecological impact. I knew what that meant. They couldn't beat me legally, so now they were appealing to bureaucracy. That's how HOAs fight wars, they weaponize paperwork. Problem is, I don't trust county suits to protect the land I bleed for. So before they could send out a team of water flow inspectors, I took a little trip back to the courthouse, back to the archives, and straight into the dusty records room where the history of this land slept like a loaded rifle. What I found was better than gold. Back in 1972, my grandfather had filed a water easement claim on that gave our ranch permanent rights to divert water from the natural stream for agricultural use during times of drought. The document was stamped, signed, sealed in ink that had faded into the color of tobacco spit. But it was valid. And here's the kicker: it predated the HOA's development by almost 40 years. That meant every drop I was redirecting was protected by law. Not just allowed guaranteed. I took that easement straight to Marlin, who nearly spat his coffee across the desk. "You've been sitting on a land nuke," he muttered. We filed a certified response to the county, attached the original claim, and copied every member of the HOA board for good measure. But I didn't stop there. I printed 24 laminated copies and stapled them to the wooden posts along my border. At the top of each one, I stamped a new sign: Water rights secured since 1972. Read it and weep. Petty? Maybe. Satisfying? Oh, you better believe it. The HOA tried to slap back with a community review meeting, but the damage was done. Their only weapon was red tape, and I just cut it with a chainsaw. Of course, no war ends clean. Around the same time the easement went public, strange things started happening again. First, my tractor battery got ripped out overnight. Then someone poured gravel down one of my irrigation pipes. One morning, I found a series of deep tire ruts carved through my west pasture. Someone had driven through my barley like they were off-roading. I knew it wasn't random. This wasn't just vandalism, it was rage, desperation. The HOA board was unraveling again, and instead of targeting me legally, someone decided to take it out on my land. I installed even more cameras, upgraded to solar-powered motion systems that triggered instant text alerts. And one night, just past 2 a.m., I got a ping. I pulled up the live feed and there she was, Teresa, the same board member who'd twisted her ankle in the mud weeks ago, stomping around my property with a flashlight and what looked like a metal detector. She was scanning the ground like she was hunting for buried treasure, or something to sabotage. I called Doolin right then and there. 20 minutes later, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up silent as a ghost. Caught her red-handed, trying to dig near one of my trench gates. Her excuse? I thought it was part of the community trail. Right. In hiking boots. At 2 a.m., they charged her with trespassing and property damage. Her mugshot made the local paper. I clipped it and stuck it next to the news segment photo on the wall of victories. The fallout was delicious. She resigned the next day. The HOA issued a formal apology, well, sort of. More like a word salad of legal mumbo-jumbo that amounted to, "We regret any misunderstandings that may have occurred. Misunderstanding my foot. These people tried to strip my rights, sabotage my land, and erase my family's history to preserve their precious image. But what they forgot was simple. Droughts don't kill ranches. Greed does. And when you fight a man with nothing left to lose, you better make sure he doesn't know the land better than you know your own backyard. Because I didn't just beat them, I broke their system. I exposed their lies, turned their clubhouse into a pond, and made their board crumble from the inside. And all I had to do was follow the water. The land remembers, even when people forget. And as long as I live and breathe on this dirt, no wanna know HOA, no board, no bureaucratis, going to take what's mine. By the time the dust settled after Teresa's arrest, the HOA board looked like a battlefield of casualties. 3 members had resigned, 2 were under investigation for misuse of funds. And Jerry, the poor accountant they'd shoved into Brenner's chair, was now the acting president of what was essentially a burning ship with no wheel. But here's the funny thing about people like that. When the image starts to crack, they don't try to fix the rot. They slap on fresh paint and call it progress. So when Jerry invited me to a peace luncheon at the clubhouse to discuss a harmonious future, I showed up boots muddy, hat tilted, and folder in hand, not because I wanted peace, but because I wanted witnesses. They gave me chicken salad, bottled water, and strained smiles. I gave them silence until Jerry finally asked, "Mr. Harper, what would it take to put all this behind us?" I smiled and handed him the folder. Inside were aerial photos of their development's irrigation system, copies of outdated permits, and one very specific letter, an anonymous tip to the IRS. Because when you dig deep enough into HOA records, you start finding things even their own members didn't know about, like unreported dues, like off-the-book spending, like tax fraud. See, while they were busy trying to cut my water line and slander my family, I was reading, researching, digging through public records like a bloodhound. And what I found was pure gold. Their HOA wasn't just incompetent, it was criminal. For the past 5 years, they'd been funneling repair funds into a shell landscaping company run by Brenner's cousin. I cross-checked invoices with county landscaping permits. Most of the jobs had never happened. Just paper trails, money laundering, and pretty graphs at the annual meetings. That folder I gave, Jerry, it wasn't a threat, it was a preview. I told him calm and quiet, "You want peace? You come clean. You audit your books, repay your residents, and leave me and my land alone. Or the IRS, the county, and every news station in the state is going to hear the full symphony." He went pale. One of the board members actually dropped her fork. I finished my sweet tea, tipped my hat, and walked out before they could recover. 2 days later, the audit notice hit their mailbox. 3 days later, the landscaping company website mysteriously vanished. And by the end of the week, Jerry called me personally, not to threaten, but to ask for my help. That call was something else. Jerry's voice was tight, like someone was squeezing his ribs with each word. "Mr. Harper, we realize mistakes were made. We're cooperating fully with investigators, and we'd like to extend a gesture of goodwill." I let him sweat in silence for a few seconds before replying. "What kind of gesture?" He cleared his throat. "We're dissolving the board. Temporarily. The HOA will function as a resident-led committee until further notice. And your ranch will be reclassified as agricultural exemption land, not subject to HOA oversight." I leaned back in my chair, staring out across my fields. "Sounds like a start," I said. But I wasn't done. Not even close. Because while their little house of cards was falling, I was already building something stronger. I met with Sheriff Doolin and a few old ranchers from nearby. We started sketching out the idea of a rural landowners cooperative, something to protect folks like me from ever dealing with HOA nonsense again. Not just a defense system, a damn wall. One rooted in law, land rights, and old school neighbor loyalty. Because I knew it wouldn't end here. Another developer, another HOA, another smiling threat in a clipboard. They'd come again. But this time, we'd be ready. The official announcement came at the end of the month. Langley Estates HOA was placed under full audit by the county and IRS. All development expansion plans were frozen, and the former board members were being interviewed for suspected financial misconduct. Brenner, he'd lawyered up and disappeared into a condo downtown, hoping the smoke would blow over. Meanwhile, my ranch, it bloomed. Not just with barley and squash, but with pride, with freedom. I planted new signs at the edge of the property. Not warnings, not threats, but declarations. Private land. Proud ranch. Established 1937. The community changed too. Without the constant surveillance of a power-hungry board, the residents started acting like neighbors again. They waved at me from across the fence, brought cookies to apologize. Some even asked if I'd consider hosting a farmer's market on Saturdays. I told them I'd think about it, and maybe I will. But first, I needed to breathe. To sit on my porch, sip sweet tea, and listen to the creek I had fought so damn hard to protect still flowing, still free, just like this ranch was always meant to be. I woke up that final Sunday to the sound of water. Not just the usual gentle trickle of the rerouted creek, but a full-throated, healthy flow, the kind you hear after a season turns and the land breathes again. The drought had broken. Overnight, a soft rain had rolled through, soaking the fields, softening the ground, and stirring life back into the dirt like a long-lost prayer. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, boots sinking just a little in the soil, and for the first time in months I felt peace. No HOA letters on the gate, no patrols, no lawsuits or silent threats, just quiet. Just the kind of quiet a man earns after standing his ground. The Langley Estates HOA had officially collapsed under its own lies. Their temporary dissolution turned permanent after the audit uncovered years of fraud. Residents voted to disband the board altogether. What was left of the organization now existed as a voluntary neighborhood group. No power, no fines, just potlucks and passive-aggressive bulletin board posts. Brenner vanished like morning fog. The county was still investigating the shell company he funneled money into, but I didn't need to see him in handcuffs. His empire of mulch and pettiness had already crumbled. Sheriff Doolin stopped by that afternoon. He didn't say much, just nodded, handed me an envelope, and sat down on the porch beside me. Inside was a copy of the final judgment. The disputed trail officially belonged to my ranch. Not that I needed the paper I already knew, but it felt right, having the system recognize what the land already understood. We sat in silence a while, watching the breeze ripple across the pasture. "You did good, Cole," Doolin finally said. "Most folks would have backed down." I shook my head. "Most folks don't have 4 generations buried under this dirt." He grunted in agreement and tipped his hat. After he left, I walked the length of the property. The fences stood tall, the trenches intact. I passed the old barn freshly painted no-wan, paused at the wall of victories. It had grown. Brenner's mugshot, Teresa's arrest article, a framed photo of the news report. And now, right in the center, I pinned the final piece, a laminated copy of the HOA's dissolution letter. Beneath it, I wrote in bold red ink, "Don't ever pick a fight with the land. It always remembers who tried to erase it." But the story didn't end there. Life on the ranch went on. Crops needed tending, animals needed feeding, and I had work to do. But the difference was, people came back. The community, the real Walnut, the HOA, Masquerade started to rebuild. Not just fences and lawns, but relationships. A couple from the neighborhood, James and Sheila, brought their kids over one weekend to learn how to plant squash. I let the oldest boy drive the tractor down the lower field. His smile was worth more than any lawsuit I ever won. Clara, the retired school teacher, organized a little market near the creek. Locals brought baked goods, handmade crafts, even honey harvested just outside town. I donated some of my produce. People called it a miracle, that the land bounced back, but it wasn't a miracle. It was the natural reward of people finally working with the land instead of trying to pave it over. We weren't just neighbors now. We were stewards, protectors, survivors of a quiet war that never should have been fought, but needed to be won. Every story has a turning point. For me, it was the moment I stood at that cut water pipe and realized that fighting back didn't mean yelling louder. It meant being smarter, being rooted, being still when the wind screamed, and letting the ground hold me. The HOA thought they could starve me out, cut me down, silence a legacy with legal jargon and brittle rules. But they forgot one thing. I don't work for committees. I work for the land. And this land, it remembers every step, every hand, every drop of blood soaked into its soil. It remembers the battles fought here, weather, time, greed, and now it remembers this victory too. My name's Cole Harper. I'm a rancher. I've got mud on my boots, scars on my hands, and a creek that flows exactly where I want it to. Let them try again someday. Let another Brenner rise up in a suit and clipboard. I'll be waiting. Not angry, not afraid, just ready. Because no one owns the land. But the land, it owns us. And if you listen close enough, you'll hear it whisper the names of those who fought to protect it. Mine will be one of them. The end.